answer to this week's discussion question, I believe the answer is twofold. The United States had no great need for oil until the period after the World War I when the automobile explosion happened. Up until this point, the primary presence in the Middle East is Christian, as our book and the reading for this week mentioned. We have Christian missionaries, Christian organizations, Bible printing, primarily religious activity from the United States in the Middle East. It is not until World War I and the period immediately after it that there starts to be a tremendous need for oil, and the sense that the United States started to see that it had an interest in having a hand in the Middle East. Now, another reason would be the fact that most of the oil-producing nations of today were part of the Ottoman Empire back then, including Iran, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, etc. These were all members of the Ottoman Empire, which, while it was on its last legs by World War I, did not fully collapse until after World War I. When it did collapse, it was carved into a number of fairly artificial nation states by the British. As a matter of fact, there is a geographical feature on, I believe, the border of Iran known as Winston's Hiccup, the joke being that Winston hiccuped while he was drawing the line back in the 1920s. So really, up until the 1920s, you really don't have a tremendous desire to do, or a tremendous drive that required the need for oil. America also is traditionally isolationary, at least up until the World War II era. While there were occasional sending of American troops outside the United States, the Spanish-American War, the attempts to aid the Russians in the fight against the communists by sending troops to Siberia and whatnot in the period immediately after World War I, by and large, America has traditionally taken the stance of keeping our interests focused pretty much entirely on our own borders, and American people would not have responded favorably to attempts to send American troops over to the Middle East purely over oil. Next, when it became evident that there were rich sources of oil in the Middle East to be exploited, we had the example of the British to look at, as is brought out in a number of books of the period, as Britain began to fall apart, colonially speaking. There was an example of what not to do, and served as a very clear example, I believe, to the men who shaped our foreign policy of the time, that the proper means to ensure that American interests were well represented in the region was not to aim for a political and military control, but economic partnership, as the bonds of economics tend to bind more firmly and for longer periods of time than the bonds of military, or similar to the way the British dominated the rest of their colonial empire. So in the end, I believe that the answer to the question is, one, our isolationist stance; two, the lack of a tremendous drive for oil up until the period of the 1920s; and three, the example of the British colonial empire showing us that that was not the way to go if we wanted to have a steady presence in the Middle East.